In 1899, the United States Census recorded the total number of automobiles produced in America that year: 1,575 electric vehicles, 1,681 steam-powered vehicles, 936 gasoline cars. Electric vehicles outsold gasoline nearly 2 to 1. Not in some obscure prototype market, not in a laboratory, on American streets in American cities, purchased by real people who had seen both options and chosen the one that was quiet, clean, and did not require them to crank a dangerous handle and risk breaking their wrist every time they wanted to leave the house. By 1900, 38% of every automobile on American roads ran on electricity. 6 years later, that world was over. The thing about a pattern is that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's be precise about what the 1900 automobile market actually looked like. Of the roughly 33,842 cars on American roads, 40% ran on steam, 38% ran on electricity, and just 22% used gasoline. The gasoline engine was the minority technology: loud, dangerous to start, unreliable at low speeds, and requiring a hand crank that could snap backward and fracture a driver's wrist if the engine caught wrong. Electric cars had none of these problems. They started instantly. They ran silently. They produced no exhaust. In cities where most American life happened, their range of 25 to 40 miles per charge was more than sufficient. The Electric Vehicle Company, founded in 1897, was already running a profitable fleet of 45 electric cabs in New York City by 1899, with 40 more available for hire. The fastest car on earth was electric. Belgian driver Camille Genetzi broke 100 kilometers per hour for the first time in history in April 1899, behind the wheel of a battery-powered racer called La Jamais Content, the Never Satisfied. The French preferred electric. The British preferred electric. And as the Hawaiian Gazette reported in 1899, France has a preference for gasoline, England for steam, and America for electricity. America had already chosen, and then someone changed the choice. On the morning of January 10, 1901, a drilling crew on a small hill near Beaumont, Texas, struck something no one had ever seen. A column of oil 150 feet high erupted from the ground at Spindletop Hill, producing nearly 100,000 barrels per day, more than all the oil wells in America combined at that moment. The Texas oil boom was born in an instant. By 1902, the Spindletop field alone had produced 17.4 million barrels. The price of oil did not rise with the excitement. It collapsed. Before Spindletop, crude oil sold for around $2 per barrel. Within months of the discovery, it dropped to 3 cents. Not $3, 3 cents per barrel. Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller's empire, which had previously controlled American oil through Pennsylvania's much smaller reserves, now faced a new reality. Petroleum was not scarce. It was practically falling from the sky over Texas. And with the new oil corporations born from Spindletop, Gulf Oil, Texaco, Humble Oil, the future Exxon, Standard Oil's monopoly fractured into something more dangerous. A cartel of competitors, all racing to move product, all needing a mass market for gasoline. That market did not yet exist at scale. The electric car was in the way. What are the odds that the year the electric car was winning the American market, the single largest oil discovery in history appeared, and within 6 years, the electric car was functionally dead? The oil industry alone did not kill the electric car. That required a partner. In 1908, Henry Ford introduced the Model T. It was not the fastest car. It was not the most comfortable. But it was priced at $825, and through continuous assembly line improvements, that price would fall to $575 by 1912, and eventually to $260 by 1925. By 1912, an electric roadster still cost $1,750. The price gap was not natural. It was manufactured, sustained by the flood of cheap gasoline that made internal combustion economically viable at mass scale, and by Ford's assembly line, which electric vehicle manufacturers had no equivalent incentive to build because their market was being actively undercut. The same year Ford's price fell to $650, inventor Charles Kettering introduced the electric starter motor, eliminating the hand crank that had made gasoline cars dangerous and awkward, and with it, the last major practical advantage electric vehicles held over gasoline. But there was a third weapon used against the electric car, and historians describe it as one of the most effective marketing campaigns of the early 20th century. Gendering. Advertising campaigns by gasoline car manufacturers began positioning electric vehicles as cars for women, suitable for short errands, gentle speeds, the domestic sphere. Gasoline was for men, for distance, for adventure, for the open road. Researchers have called this a lock-in effect, a cultural barrier so powerful that even buyers who might have preferred an electric vehicle felt social pressure to choose gasoline. The timelines don't fit any theory of natural market evolution. A product that outsold its competitor 2-to-1 in 1899 was culturally extinct within 15 years. That does not happen by accident. Here is where the skeptical account runs out of road. The standard historical explanation holds that electric cars simply lost a fair technological race. Gasoline offered more range. Ford offered lower prices. The electric starter removed the last friction. Case closed. But what the skeptical account cannot explain is the coordination. Spindletop collapses gasoline prices in 1901. Ford introduces mass-produced gasoline vehicles in 1908. Kettering's electric starter arrives in 1912. Road-building programs, funded by gasoline tax revenue, begin expanding rural access precisely during the window when range limitations most disadvantaged electric vehicles. Each development arrives exactly when the electric car needs it least. Nobody talks about the fact that Standard Oil's derivative companies were not passive beneficiaries of this shift. They were active lobbyists for road construction, fuel infrastructure, and legislative frameworks that made electric charging infrastructure economically unviable to build at the same pace as gasoline filling stations. The Electric Vehicle Company, the dominant American EV manufacturer, collapsed in bankruptcy in 1907, not from lack of demand, from a combination of financial manipulation, patent warfare, and a market environment that had been systematically reshaped around its competitors' infrastructure in the span of 6 years. What if the story of the electric car's death is not the story of a better technology winning? What if it is the story of a worse technology being made cheaper, being given roads, being handed a cultural identity, and being backed by the most powerful industrial interests in the world, while the alternative was quietly starved? By the early 1910s, electric vehicle range had improved from 50 miles to approximately 90 miles on a single charge, without the benefit of the massive capital investment that the gasoline industry was receiving. Thomas Edison spent years attempting to develop a superior battery for electric vehicles, collaborating directly with Henry Ford, who had himself once expressed a preference for electric power and maintained a friendly correspondence with Edison on the subject. Ford publicly stated in 1914 that he and Edison were working on a low-cost electric car that could be sold for between $500 and $750, running on an improved alkaline battery. The project was announced. Then it disappeared. No finished vehicle, no public explanation. The collaboration was quietly abandoned. The photographs tell a different story than the silence does. In 1900, American streets held a clean, quiet, electric future. By 1935, that future was gone. not because the technology had failed, but because the economics had been deliberately shaped against it, and the cultural identity of the automobile had been sold to gasoline so completely that an entire generation forgot electricity had ever won. Here is what the numbers leave us with. In 1899, America produced nearly twice as many electric vehicles as gasoline ones. In 1901, the largest oil gusher in history made gasoline nearly free. In 1908, mass production made gasoline cars cheaper than electrics could compete with. In 1912, the last friction point for gasoline was engineered away. By 1935, the electric car was gone. Each of these moments, considered alone, looks like market forces. Considered together, they describe a corridor, a 6-year window in which every structural advantage the electric car held was methodically removed, and every structural advantage of gasoline was methodically created. The question is not whether the electric car lost. The question is who built the maze it got lost in. The pattern exists. The documents are public. The companies are named. And 120 years later, the world is spending trillions of dollars trying to rebuild, from scratch, exactly the electric transportation infrastructure that was already winning in 1899. That is a question worth sitting with.